Welcome to No More and Guess Less with Teresa. Hey guys, we are back again, and now we're going to talk about the MacDaddy of all rhetorical theory, and that is Aristotle. Now this guy was so busy, he actually made sure that he wrote a collective work separated into 3 books to do with rhetoric. In the first book, he actually talks about the speaker and how important it is for the speaker to be logical and reason in a particular way. In book 2, he basically talks about the kind of communicator the audience would react very positively toward. And then in book 3, he gives advice on the delivery of the speech. So once again, it seems that Aristotle falls into the same tradition as Plato did, as a philosophical rhetoric. Where he departs from Plato is in his more specific definition of what rhetoric is. Of course, we are still saying that it is exerting influence through the use of words, written or spoken. But he also defines the 4 uses that rhetoric is usually called upon. The first use is to obviously be able to argue, okay? And for him, an argument is only valid if it actually looks at both sides of the argument. Secondly, if you can argue or if you can influence, you can of course defend yourself. Just imagine somebody accuses you of something and you're actually innocent. You can use good argumentation and good rhetoric in order to get out of the situation. A little bit of foreshadowing is going on here, because a third specific use of rhetoric says that if you do not have any scientific insight, rhetoric can still help you out. Let's say you haven't done any research or any experiments on a particular topic that you are talking about, so you don't have conclusive proof. Aristotle says with rhetoric, you still might be able to convince somebody of something, even though tangible proof or evidence is not available. The last use of rhetoric that Aristotle points out, and I think this is a very relevant use, especially in today's times, is the prevention of fraud and injustice. If you can argue, if you know about influence, and if you are able to exercise rhetoric, you might be able to call out people who are being fraudulent, who are being shady, who have alternative motives. So please keep these 4 in mind. Another insight that Aristotle has actually given us is the distinction between rhetoric and dialectic. Very quickly, rhetoric has to do with a speech scenario, and dialectic has to do with a debate scenario. So it's a one-on-one, not like rhetoric where you have one speaker who addresses a large audience. The real nitty-gritty of this particular podcast, however, is to do with Aristotle's view that rhetoric can be seen as an art. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see a laddering of knowledge that Aristotle has put forward. He says that when we are finding out about certain topics and certain things in the world, we're going through 5 different levels of knowing. The most rudimentary level is observation. So you are confronted with something for the first time. The second level is memory. You've seen something and it actually sticks in your mind. You do have a certain imprint of whatever you have observed. Experience has to do with you actually getting active in what you have observed and what you have remembered. And once you have experienced it and tried something, you might be able to get artistic with it. And lastly, once you are artistic with it and once you have memory and experience, you might actually be able to produce scientific knowledge which would obviously catapult you to the highest level of knowing something. Why don't we stay in the artistic realm? Let's say you have some drawing talents and you are confronted with somebody who is a virtuoso in the art of charcoal drawing. Maybe you're passing by this artist while you are shopping, and you are now observing what he's doing. Because you're so mesmerized, you're trying to memorize some of the techniques that the street artist has used. And once you're home, you're trying to apply some of the things that you've seen. You're experiencing the art of charcoal drawing. Okay. And hopefully, as you are trying and as you are gaining knowledge about the technique, you're becoming artistic. So you are able to manipulate the object with your knowledge. So not only can you apply what you have witnessed, you're also starting to add to the inventory of the strokes and of the techniques that you can apply in the charcoal drawing. And once you've done all of this, you could maybe write a textbook about charcoal drawing yourself, in which you would obviously give a little bit more of a scientific insight. You would give processes, you would give tactics, you would give advice and recommendations, which is then the scientific knowledge level. Coming back to rhetoric, Aristotle says that rhetoric is an art, it is not a science. For him, science is more of a natural science scenario. He thinks about physics and chemistry and mathematics. And when it comes to people, we can't apply the same rules and the same laws that we have in the natural world. Therefore, when you are talking about rhetoric, he says you can never be scientific. It stops short of being a science. It's not a science. But can you manipulate the object, as in your speech? Absolutely. Can you get your audience to go with you? 100%. He simply says, because it is a topic to do with humans, and humans are unpredictable, we cannot elevate rhetoric to a scientific level. So seeing that we can manipulate, there are of course some recommendations that Aristotle has made. For example, he gives advice on the 3 types of speeches. There are the forensic speeches, the epideictic speeches, and the deliberative speeches. Forensic rhetoric, the word forensic might have given you a clue, looks at the past. Okay, so these are speeches that deal with justice and injustice. Your lawyer would give a forensic speech, because if you're being accused of something, you need to be defended. So that's a forensic rhetoric. It deals with the past. The epideictic demonstrative rhetoric deals with the present, and these speeches are usually given at inaugural events, like an organization starting off, or maybe at a funeral. So you're basically demonstrating why the organization is so great, or why it is such a good idea to have an organization like that. Or when it comes to the funeral, you are establishing the honor of those who have passed away. Some of the tactics that are being used under epideictic speeches are praise and blame. The deliberative rhetoric is what we see in the political sphere. And these speeches or these rhetorical events deal with the future. What I mean by that? Politicians try and make you see why it would be appropriate and desirable to vote for them. So therefore they will refer to the future. If you vote me, I will do this and that. Okay, so this is what politicians usually say as an example, and this is how they get you to vote for them for sure. Of course, they do not just talk about the desirability of voting for them, they also talk about the other parties and the other politicians that are out there and why it is undesirable to go that route. Once again, the procedures that Aristotle puts forward are those of appeals and dehortation. Dehortation has to do with discouragement, and appeals obviously have to do with encouragement. Finishing off, guys. Aristotle was very much embedded in the Greek realities. At that time, Greece was a democracy. Once again, this is 2,500 years ago. What they were dealing with, however, was a direct democracy, not an indirect or representative democracy that we have today. Basically today we are voting for people who will represent us. That's why it's called a representative democracy. Whereas then it was a direct democracy. So they filled these arenas with people who wanted to say something and wanted to rally for something. Of course, first of all, you had to have a very loud voice to have yourself heard, but you also needed to be rhetorically skilled in order to get the audience to move with you and to think with you and to be influenced by you. So this is his point of departure. And it's always very good for you to understand the propositions and claims that people make in the context that they actually arose. And with Aristotle, it's the direct democracy of ancient Greece. I hope you enjoyed it, Schnookies. Until next time, bye!